Gospel music is built on humility, but fame comes with strong personalities. Today, we're counting down 20 gospel legends often labeled as arrogant by fans and critics. Is it pride, confidence, or just being misunderstood? Stay till the end. Some names will surprise you. Let's get into it. 1. Thomas A. Dorsey's journey was not a simple change of tempo, but radical reinvention that many in the sanctified circles of his day saw as outright betrayal. Here was a man, once celebrated as Georgia Tom, a pioneering figure in the blues, a composer of raucous and profitable party music, daring to bring the very feel of that backroom rhythm into the sacred space of the church. To traditionalists, it was a dangerous fusion, an unholy alloy. The piano's former trills and bass patterns, now echoing in hymns, felt like a world creeping in, not the spirit soaring out. The resistance was not merely disagreement. It was often cold and practical. Churches locked their doors to him. Pastors openly scorned the new sound, deeming it undignified, a corruption of true worship. Dorsey faced not just artistic criticism, but a profound theological dismissal. Yet, within him burned a conviction that was unshakable. He wasn't just writing songs. He was giving voice to a fuller emotional truth of the black religious experience, one that held the weight of Friday's cross and the release of Sunday's resurrection, all within the same measure. This conviction could come across as stubborn, even arrogant. He wasn't asking for permission to innovate. He believed he was channeling a necessary truth, and the established norms would simply have to catch up. 2. Mahalia Jackson carried her title, the Queen of Gospel, not as a mere honorific, but as a solemn coronation, and her reign was absolute. To understand the sheer force of her conviction, one must begin with those famous refusals. The world of secular blues and popular music laid fortunes at her feet, offers that represented an escape hatched from the economic struggle that defined so much of her early life. The temptation wasn't trivial. It was a path to a different kind of kingdom. Yet her response, "I sing God's music," was delivered not as an apology, but as a final decree, a statement of fact so clean and sharp it could slice through any negotiation. That clarity, that unwavering certainty in her divine assignment, could feel less like humility and more like a spiritual ultimatum. There was an imperial quality to her presence, both in person and in performance. She governed the stage with profound gravity, believing the songs she sang were not performances, but vessels for a Holy Spirit that demanded respect and proper conveyance. This could translate into a sternness with musicians and fellow singers, a demanding expectation for a purity of approach that brooked no frivolity or undue theatrical flair. To those accustomed to more collaborative or commercially flexible artists, her manner could seem imperious, even daunting. She was protecting something she viewed as sacred from the creeping influences of show business, and her guardianship was fierce. Yet, to perceive this as mere arrogance is to misunderstand the weight she carried. She stood as a living bulwark at a critical crossroads for gospel music. In an era of growing crossover and experimentation, her refusal to blur the line was a defiant act of preservation. She understood that her voice, with its unparalleled depth and sorrow-soaked triumph, was not truly her own. It was an instrument for a history, for a people's pain and hope, and to divert for mere entertainment would have been a profound betrayal. Her steadfastness was the anchor that allowed the genre to develop its identity without being swept away by the currents of commercialization. 3. James Cleveland earned his crown as the king of gospel not through ceremony, but through sheer, formidable will, building an empire of sound one choir stand at a time. He was the architect where others were pioneers, drafting the blueprints for the modern gospel choir with a ruler's precision. His authority was rooted in a revolutionary talent for arrangement, transforming the raw, congregational energy of the church into complex, stirring harmonies that demanded both technical skill and deep soul. This gift, however, came with an expectation of total fealty. To learn from Cleveland was to submit to his exacting methods, a prospect that could feel less like collaboration and more like a mandate from a throne. His very voice was a testament to his defiant authority, a rough-hewn, raspy instrument that shattered pristine notions of what a gospel lead should sound like. In that gravelly tone was a preached authenticity, a sound that felt earned through struggle and became the foundational texture for a new reality. He directed his musicians and choirs with the exacting ear of a composer and the unyielding discipline of a drill sergeant. Rehearsals were not democratic. There was a Cleveland way to phrase a line, to punch a rhythm, to build a crescendo, and his vision admitted no compromise. This unwavering certainty could be profoundly intimidating, often perceived as the arrogance of a genius who believed his path was the only one that led to musical truth. His most monumental act of sovereignty was the creation of the Gospel Music Workshop of America in 1968. The GMWA was less an organization and more a nation-state of its design, a sprawling annual assembly that became the indispensable heart of the gospel world. Here, his methods were codified into law, taught in countless workshops, and propagated by thousands of directors and singers who would carry his sound back to their home churches. For 1 week each summer, he was not just a performer but a head of state, presiding over a living legacy that ensured the Cleveland sound would become the dominant dialect of the genre. It was a breathtaking consolidation of influence, turning personal style into universal curriculum. For Sister Rosetta Tharpe's audacity was a holy spectacle, a spiritual lightning strike delivered with the crackle of an overdriven amplifier. Long before the world recognized the genre called rock and roll, she was its undisputed architect, blending the sacred vocabulary of the church with the thrilling, physical grammar of the blues and the nightclub. Her stage was as likely to be the hallowed floor of a massive tabernacle as the smoky glow of the Cotton Club, and she brought to both the same flamboyant, unapologetic virtuosity. To the gospel purist, this was not innovation but sacrilege, a reckless blurring of lines that threatened to make the holy profane and turn testimony into mere entertainment. Her confidence seemed less like ministry and more like a spectacular, self-aggrandizing stunt. That confidence was weaponized through her instrument. She didn't merely accompany herself on guitar. She dueled with it, unleashing distorted, searing solos that were all declaration and riff, a language of electric exaltation that had never before been applied to gospel lyrics. Her vocal delivery matched this power, a clear, strong shout that could be both pious and playful, bending notes with sensibility borrowed from the blues singers she once performed alongside. This fusion was not accidental but intentional, a bold claim that the spirit could move with just as much vitality on a Saturday night as on a Sunday morning. For traditionalists guarding a legacy of solemnity, this was the height of arrogance, a view that she was promoting Rosetta Tharpe first and the gospel second. The backlash was steeped in more than just musical taste. It was a critique of her very person. Her performances were seen by some as theatrical and self-promoting, her sequin dresses and charismatic showmanship clashing with subdued expectations of female gospel singers. Her personal life, including multiple marriages and a famously staged wedding at a baseball stadium, fueled criticism that she craved the spotlight more than the sanctuary. This perception painted her as a diva who used the church's music as a vehicle for secular fame, an accusation that overlooked the deep, genuine faith that underpinned every note she played. Her defiance was read as pride, her synthesis as a cynical bid for crossover success. 5. Andraé Crouch's revolution was not a whisper, but a full-band crescendo, a sweeping harmonic shift that many within the church heard as a fundamental breach of contract. As the self-proclaimed and ultimately accepted father of modern gospel, his approach was one of radiant assimilation, weaving the smooth textures of pop, the backbeat of rock, and the lush orchestration of contemporary balladry into the fabric of worship. To ears accustomed to the driving piano of the choir tradition or the raw fervor of the sanctified church, songs like "The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power" or "My Tribute" sounded suspiciously like mainstream entertainment. The very accessibility that would make his music globally beloved was, to traditionalists, its greatest sin, a dilution of holy distinctiveness for the sake of palatable appeal. His confidence, however, was serene and unassailable, rooted in a profound belief that his musical revelation was itself a divine gift. He saw no walls between the sacred and the secular when it came to instrumentation or melody. God owned all sound. This theological certainty allowed him to defend his new sound without apology, often meeting criticism with a puzzled grace that could itself feel dismissive. When accused of making gospel sound like the radio, he essentially agreed, believing the radio needed to sound like gospel. His workshops and choir directions were infused with this gentle but immovable conviction, creating a sound so polished and precisely arranged that it demanded a different kind of discipline, one that could feel like a corporate production rather than a spirit-led outbreak. This perceived arrogance was compounded by his unprecedented crossover success. His work with artists like Michael Jackson and Madonna, and his scores for major Hollywood films, were not quiet-side endeavors but very public partnerships. To purists, this was a final proof of a dangerous compromise, a man of the gospel being seduced by the glittering world. Yet, in Crouch's mind, he was not being seduced. He was evangelizing. He carried his sound into those spaces with the same quiet authority, aiming to sanctify the mainstream from within, using its own language to convey an ancient message. 6. Shirley Caesar commands a stage with the formidable authority of a prophet on duty, a presence so potent and focused it feels less like performance and more like a spiritual summons. Her title, the Queen of Gospel, is not merely honorary but operational, a reflection of sovereignty earned over 7 decades through a voice that can shift from a tender whisper to a roaring corrective in a single bar. This is not an artist who entertains. She interrogates, exhorts, and delivers a verdict, often weaving full, fiery sermons between the verses of her songs. That direct, no-nonsense approach leaves little room for casual engagement. She performs with the urgency of someone who believes the world and the church are both running out of time, and her impatience with any perceived frivolity or half-heartedness is palpable. To an audience member or a fellow artist seeking mere enjoyment, this intensity can feel confrontational, even dismissive. Her authority is rooted in a deep, unshakable code of holiness, a code shaped by the bedrock traditions of the Pentecostal Church and her own hardscrabble upbringing as the daughter of a North Carolina sharecropper. She carries the weight of that legacy not as a relic, but as a living standard. When she fixes her gaze on a crowd and declares, "I know what holiness is," it is both a testimony and a challenge. This can translate into a legendary lack of patience for what she views as a lack of commitment, whether from musicians failing to match her fervor or from a generation she fears is trading substance for style. In an era where gospel increasingly flirted with cosmopolitan production and secular crossover, Caesar stood as a granite monument to unadulterated, church-born conviction. Her toughness, then, could be interpreted as a form of spiritual protectionism, guarding a flame she worried might be extinguished by trendy breezes. This regal inflexibility, however, is precisely what has made her a pillar of authenticity. There is no artifice, no pop star pretension, only the relentless, sometimes jarring, offer realness. Her famed shout is not a theatrical move, but a physical manifestation of a spirit too large to contain, and it demands a similar authenticity from her surroundings. While her demeanor might scan as stern or arrogant to some, to her devoted followers, it is the unwavering clarity of a true believer, a leader who will not compromise the message for the medium. She rules her musical domain with a matriarch's exacting love, believing that the cost of discipleship, in life and in song, is high, and that the reward for frivolity is nothing but noise. 7. Albertina Walker carried her royal title, the Queen of Gospel Music, with a grace that was both elegant and impregnable, a velvet glove over a steel will. Her sovereignty was not expressed through booming pronouncements, but through a discerning eye, an impeccable ear, and an unyielding standard of excellence. As the founder and commander of the Caravans, she did not merely lead a singing group. She presided over the most prestigious finishing school gospel has ever known. Her stage was a classroom, her tours a boot camp, and her approval the only diploma that mattered. Within that sacred structure, raw, phenomenal talent was not coddled, it was forged. She possessed a curator's instinct for a voice that could carry a legacy, earing the future in the untrained power of a young James Cleveland, the narrative conviction of a Dorothy Norwood, the explosive potential of a Bessie Griffin or an Inez Andrews. To be chosen by Albertina was an immense honor, but it came with a covenant of demanding discipline. Rehearsals were exhaustive, diction had to be precise, stage comportment was to be dignified yet powerful, and personal conduct was expected to reflect well on the group. Her firmness could feel severe to those yearning for unbridled expression. Her discerning ear might reject a riff or a run that felt too frivolous, too individualistic. This was a collective enterprise, and she was its chief architect, tolerating no shaky pillars in her musical edifice. What could be perceived as a matriarchal arrogance was, in truth, the fierce protectiveness of a woman safeguarding both her singers and the sanctity of the music itself. In the turbulent, often exploitive world of mid-century gospel touring, she was a buffer against chaos and poor treatment, insisting on professionalism and respect from promoters. Her toughness was a shield. She understood that the gift was holy, but the business was harsh, and her artists would be prepared for both. Her no was legendary, but was never capricious. It was a calculated defense of the sound, a reputation, and a spiritual mission. 8. Dorothy Norwood authority on a stage is the kind that can only be earned through miles, a presence that speaks of countless revivals, long bus tours, and the quiet, relentless accumulation of history. She carries herself not simply as a singer, but as a walking archive of the gospel tradition, a direct inheritor of the caravan's legacy, who became a sovereign force in her own right. That experience grants her an immediate, unassailable respect. When she steps to the microphone, she is a veteran who has seen trends come and go, and her approach bears the weight of that perspective. There is a seasoned certainty in her delivery, a lack of frivolity that can feel, to a modern audience accustomed to spectacle, like a form of strict and uncompromising classicism. Her power has always resided in the story. Songs like The Denied Mother are not merely performed but testified, full-length narratives of struggle and redemption delivered with a dramatist's timing and a pastor's conviction. This command over storytelling requires a controlled stage, a disciplined environment where every gesture and vocal inflection serves a parable. That control can translate into a formidable, no-nonsense demeanor. She is not there to entertain in the abstract. She is there to testify, to convince and convict. This single-minded focus on the message, refined over 6 decades, leaves little room for the casual or the coy. Her expectation is that the audience and the music meet her at the level of serious engagement, a demand that can be misinterpreted as sternness or a rigid refusal to adapt. In an industry that increasingly chased crossover appeal and polished production, Norwood's steadfast commitment to the raw, narrative core traditional gospel could appear as a deliberate, even stubborn, resistance to progress. She became a guardian of a certain flame, one that valued lyrical substance and emotional authenticity over musical novelty. This uncompromising stance was less about rejecting change and more about protecting a foundational truth from being diluted. Her arrogance, then, was really the confidence of a curator who knows the intrinsic value of the artifact she preserves, believing that some roots must never be dug up for the sake of new landscaping. 9. Tramaine Hawkins' entrance into a song is less a beginning and more an event, a seismic shift in atmosphere where testimony transforms into theater of the highest spiritual order. Her vocal prowess is not merely technical, though its range and control are staggering, but is fundamentally dramatic, a force that seems to channel something vast and overwhelming. When she delivers a cornerstone like Changed, the performance transcends singing. It is a visceral reenactment of conversion, each soaring run and sustained note mapping the contours of a spiritual rupture. This sheer, untamed power, coupled with a stage presence of radiant and formidable confidence, can indeed feel diva-esque. Yet it is a divinity claimed not for personal glorification, but as a necessary vessel for a message too colossal for subtlety. There is an unmistakable regality to her bearing, a glamour in her presentation that borrowed from the world of secular stars, while fiercely consecrated to a holy purpose. In the late 1970s and 80s, as gospel music navigated new sonic landscapes, Tramaine stood at the vanguard, her voice riding the lush, disco-infused productions of her husband Walter Hawkins' compositions. This fusion of sanctified message with contemporary, danceable rhythm was, to some traditionalists, a risky glamorization. Her confidence in owning this sound, in delivering a holy shout over a 4-on-the-floor beat, could be perceived as audacious, a blending of realms that felt as much like entertainment as ministry. But to dismiss her drama as mere performance is to misunderstand the currency of her anointing. The diva quality is not arrogance, but the absolute assurance of someone who has been irrevocably altered by the subject of her song. The tremolo in her voice, the cascading ad-libs, the way she can hang a single word in the air like a suspended miracle. These are the techniques of a master storyteller whose story is one of radical grace. She does not just sing about being changed. Her very delivery is the evidence of that change, performed with vulnerability that is paradoxically wrapped in supreme vocal command. 10. Twinkie Clark's genius operated from the piano bench with the quiet, formidable focus of a master architect, drafting blueprints for a new celestial city of sound. Her gift was not in mere performance, but in total composition, writing, arranging, and orchestrating a gospel that was staggeringly complex, harmonically adventurous, and fiercely virtuosic. In her hands and through the voices of her sisters, the traditional choir aesthetic was deconstructed and rebuilt as something both profoundly sanctified and dazzlingly technical. The intricate, interlocking harmonies, the daring modulations, the breathtaking vocal runs that became the Clark sisters' signature. These were not spontaneous outbursts, but meticulously crafted revelations. This created a new and difficult standard, a gospel that demanded precision of classical training alongside the fervor of the Holy Ghost. This technical revolution bred a collective confidence that was palpable and, to many aspiring singers, profoundly intimidating. They moved and sang with the unified assurance of those who knew they were operating on a different plane, a sisterhood that had been drilled in a unique musical language of their own invention. There was a palpable awareness of their own excellence, a sense that they were not just participating in the genre, but actively expanding its boundaries. This could read as aloofness or even hubris to outsiders, a closed circle of sublime talent that seemed to regard conventional gospel conventions as mere starting points for their own celestial explorations. Yet, what could be perceived as arrogance was, in essence, the fearless manifestation of a divine gift. Twinkie's vision and the group's execution of it was a theological statement in itself. That offer your absolute best to God meant not resting in traditional forms, but pushing into uncharted musical territory. Their confidence was the armor needed to protect this innovative sound from critics who found it too worldly, too busy, or too proud. The Clark sisters' style, with its jazzy chords, improvisational fury, and sheer athleticism, declared that holiness could be sophisticated, that praise could be intellectually thrilling as well as emotionally overwhelming. 11. Daryl Coley's title, The Vocal Genius, was not a piece of marketing hyperbole, but sober, widely acknowledged truth within the gospel world, a diagnosis of a rare and almost otherworldly ability. His instrument was a marvel of elasticity and precision, capable of traversing octaves with the fluidity of thought, weaving improvisational tapestries so complex they seemed less like spontaneous expression and more like the revelation of a precomposed, heavenly score. This superhuman facility meant he inhabited a musical space few could access, and that solitude of skill naturally fostered a specific and demanding artistic vision. To work with Coley was to submit to the standards of a virtuoso for whom the boundary between the possible and the impossible was simply a horizon to be sung toward. In the studio or in live performance, this manifested as an intense, almost scholarly pursuit of vocal perfection. A song was not merely conveyed. It was architecturally deconstructed and rebuilt through his improvisations. His famed extended renditions, like his transformative take on The Garden, were masterclasses of melodic reinvention, each run and riff a calculated yet soulful exploration. For musicians and producers, this could be a daunting experience. His vision was internal, meticulous, and non-negotiable. He heard the intricate mathematics of harmony and modulation with such clarity that compromise felt like a corruption of the music itself. That unwavering certainty could be perceived as the arrogance of savant, impatient with those who couldn't follow the rapid, celestial map he was charting. Yet, to mistake this for mere diva behavior was to misunderstand the spiritual mechanics of his gift. Coley's demand for precision was not about personal glorification, but about stewardship. He was handling what he believed was a sacred, fragile vocabulary, the language of praise, and he would not let it be rendered poorly or carelessly. His vocal acrobatics were never empty calisthenics. They were expressions of a worship so overwhelming it could not be contained within standard melodies. The genius was always in service of the gospel, a tool to express the inexpressible vastness of God. 12. Vanessa Bell Armstrong's voice was not just an instrument. It was a force of nature, a colossal wave of sound that could oscillate between vulnerable tenderness and tectonic power with unnerving control. She possessed one of the most formidable and technically skilled voices in gospel, a gift that carried with it the weight of immense responsibility. To hear her navigate the emotional precipice of a song like Peace Be Still was to witness a masterclass in dynamics. Every whispered plea, every thundering crescendo was a deliberate, soul-wrenching choice. This profound capacity to convey deep emotion, however, was not born of mere sentimentality. It was a product of rigorous discipline and a fierce, unwavering expectation of musical excellence. That expectation could radiate from her as a palpable, intense energy, both on stage and in the studio. She understood the architecture of a great gospel performance, the needed support from musicians, the specific emotional arc, the non-negotiable integrity of pitch and timing. When those elements were not met to her standard, her intensity could focus into a stern and demanding clarity. For fellow musicians or producers, this could be daunting. Her artistic vision was singular and steeped in a reverence of music that left little room for casual approximation. What some might interpret as impatience or harshness was often a frustration of a virtuoso who heard the potential for transcendence in a moment and could not abide anything less. Yet, this formidable demeanor was a necessary counterpart to her breathtaking vulnerability in performance. The very rawness she channeled so effectively required a protected space and a flawless foundation to land with its full impact. She was, in essence, a fierce protector of a sacred trust, the marriage of lyrical truth and musical truth. In an industry that could sometimes prioritize commercial accessibility over depth, her unyielding standard served as a bulwark, insisting that gospel music, at its pinnacle, demanded both heart and impeccable craft. 13. Kirk Franklin's relationship with gospel music is that of a brilliant, restless, and sometimes controversial architect, one who surveyed the traditional landscape and decided it needed not just a new coat of paint, but a complete structural renovation. His success is quantifiable and unprecedented, an empire built on merging the sacred with the streets, wrapping complex theology in hip-hop beats, R&B harmonies, and the kinetic energy of arena tour. This rebranding was, to him, an act of survival, a desperate bid to make the gospel relevant to a generation that saw the church as a relic. But such radical translation requires a leader who operates with the unflinching confidence of a CEO and the creative myopia of a visionary. Franklin's leadership style is famously demanding, expecting from his choirs and crews a level of professional precision and stylistic flexibility that could feel more corporate than congregational. He is uniquely self-aware in his presentation of this persona, openly confessing the battles with pride and the deep wounds of church hurt. This vulnerability complicates a narrative of arrogance. It suggests his drive is not merely ego, but a complex engine fueled by both a passion for souls and a reaction to past rejection. His confidence on stage, the pointed fingers, the direct-to-camera sermons, the sheer scale of his Sunday service productions can feel less like an invitation and more like command performance. To traditionalists, this fusion felt like a surrender, a cynical pandering that diluted the music's holiness for streaming numbers and crossover appeal. His language, peppered with business terms and talk of brands, struck many as the antithesis of humble ministry. Yet, to dismiss his approach as mere arrogance is to ignore the prophetic thread within it. Kirk Franklin operates with the urgency of someone who believes the message is too vital to let the methodology stagnate and die. His demands, his slick productions, his invasion of secular spaces are all tactical moves in a grand evangelism strategy. He saw a widening chasm between the pulpit and the people and built a flashy, loud, and irresistible bridge. The very traits labeled as arrogant, the supreme confidence in his sonic vision, the relentless hustle, the recalibration of gospel's center of gravity from the choir loft to the global stage, are the exact traits that have simultaneously preserved and expanded the genre's reach. 14. Donnie McClurkin commands a stage and a pulpit with the same formidable authority, a presence built upon two unshakable pillars, a vocal powerhouse capable of breathtaking virtuosity, and a definitive, harrowing testimony of deliverance from abuse and despair. This combination, the sublime gift and the stark, redeemed pain, forges in him a certainty that is absolute. He does not suggest, he declares. His strong, often controversial opinions on theology, personal conduct, and the fabric of Christian life are delivered with a pastoral tone that brooks no argument, a lack of equivocation that can feel like a closed door rather than an open conversation. To admirers, this is a clarity of survivor who has found truth and will not risk its dilution. To critics, it is the inflexibility of a man who confuses his personal journey with universal law. This certainty, amplified by his immense platform as a Grammy-winning artist and a national radio host, translates into a public persona that can seem above critique, armored in conviction that his views are divinely sanctioned. When he speaks on sensitive cultural or theological issues, he does so from a position of what he perceives as prophetic obligation, not open debate. That unyielding posture, while rooted in a desire to protect and guide, can come across as dismissive of alternative lived experiences or more nuanced theological frameworks. His is a black and white gospel in an increasingly gray world, and his confidence in delivering it can be perceived as a spiritual and intellectual arrogance, an implication that complexity itself is a form of compromise. Yet, to reduce this to mere arrogance is to overlook the engine of his conviction. McClurkin's entire ministry is built on the premise that a very specific, transformative truth rescued him from destruction. The man who sings "Stand" with such imperious strength is, in his own understanding, upholding the very plumb line that straightened his own broken life. His lack of ambiguity is, for him, a form of fidelity to the scripture as he interprets it and to the testimony he is compelled to share. The same certainty that alienates some becomes a lifeline for others who crave unequivocal answers in a tumultuous world. 15. Yolanda Adams embodies a grace so polished and seamless it becomes its own kind of armor, a radiant and deliberate fortress built to protect the message she carries. Her transition from a grounded world of a classroom teacher to the stratosphere of gospel stardom was not a hesitant leap of faith, but a walk of profound self-belief, a quiet conviction that her voice was meant for a congregation far larger than any school could hold. This move required an inner certainty that bypassed the traditional, often turbulent, choir loft apprenticeship and stepped directly into a role of national ambassador for the gospel in its most contemporary, crossover form. To build and maintain that role, a figure equally at home in the White House, on the Grammy stage, or on syndicated radio, requires not just talent, but the unwavering control of a master strategist over every facet of her image and message. This control is her signature strength, and it can be misinterpreted. In a genre that often venerates the raw, the unmediated outburst of spirit, Adams's productions are impeccably smooth, her vocals a cascade of velvet strength, her public appearances consistently gracious and poised. There is no audible sweat, no visible strain. For some, this very perfection can feel distant, a calculated brand management that sandpapers away the gritty, relatable edges of struggle. Her unwavering firmness in maintaining the standard, in never allowing presentation to fray, projects a sense of self-possession so complete it can verge on regal detachment. Yet, to perceive this as mere image consciousness is to misunderstand her mission. That polished vessel is precisely what allows her to dock in mainstream harbors inaccessible to more traditionally raw gospel voices. She is not diluting the message. She is painstakingly translating it into a dialect of elegance and sophistication that disarms and attracts a different audience. Her control is a form of spiritual and professional discipline, a refusal to let the sacred be ghettoized or seen as anything less than excellent. She understands that to reach the ears of the powerful, the skeptical, or the unchurched, the presentation must be flawless, because the countercultural nature of the message itself is already disruptive enough. 16. CeCe Winans occupies a unique space in the gospel pantheon, one of serene and seemingly unchallenged sovereignty. Her status as the most awarded female gospel artist ever is not the result of flamboyant revolution or loud controversy, but of a deep, unwavering consistency. Her excellence and astounding longevity are built upon a foundation of quiet, steel-strong conviction, a certainty about her faith and the singular purpose of her music that is as non-negotiable as it is softly spoken. This profound, unshakable center projects an aura of untouchable certainty, a spiritual and artistic equilibrium that can feel, to outsiders, less like humility and more like a form of impeccable, insulated grace. In an industry often marked by dramatic testimonies, stylistic reinventions, and public struggles, Winans' path has been one of remarkable stability and focused devotion. There is a sense that she moves within protected lane, guided by a compass calibrated to a higher authority than trends or accolades. This can translate into a public persona that is graceful yet reserved, generous yet perfectly bounded. She does not court controversy or engage in public debates. She simply embodies her truth. For some, this very steadiness, this refusal to be ruffled or to dilute her message for broader appeal, can come across as a form of holy aloofness, a confidence so complete it needs no external validation or energetic defense. Yet, what might be perceived as an untouchable aura is, in reality, the clarity of a woman who resolved the core dilemma of gospel artistry long ago. For CeCe Winans, there is no conflict between the sacred and the professional, no tension between ministry and music. They are one and the same. Her certainty is not arrogance but integration. That quiet steel is what allowed her to navigate the immense pressures of the Winans family legacy, the crossover success with addictive love, and the constant expectations of the industry without ever appearing fractured or swayed. She is a curator of a specific, pristine sound of worship, one that prioritizes clarity, melody, and lyrical purity over sonic experimentation or theatrical delivery. 17. Marvin Sapp's authority in the gospel landscape is one carved from the bedrock of profound personal cataclysm. After the passing of his wife Melinda, his ministry and music underwent a seismic shift, hardening from polished professionalism into something far more raw and monumental. A song like Never Would Have Made It ceased to be a mere composition and became a public altar built from private grief, a testimony so specific in its pain yet so universal in its declaration that it instantly entered the canon of modern songs. This is the key to Sapp's perceived certainty. He is not singing about concepts, but narrating from the other side of valley he has actually crossed. The conviction in his baritone leaves absolutely no room for doubt, because it is the voice of a survivor presenting the evidence of his own deliverance. This hard-won authority projects an aura that can be spiritually intimidating. There is no frivolity, no decorative riff that does not serve the weight of the message. When he stands to deliver such an anthem, the performance is not an invitation to discussion. It is a sharing of a verdict reached in the solitary chambers of loss. For a listener or even a fellow artist, this can feel like an unapproachable standard of authenticity, a lived-in truth so complete that it brooks no alternative interpretation or half-hearted engagement. His stage presence is that of a granite monument, solemn and immovable, and the sheer mass of his testimony can make other expressions of faith feel lightweight by comparison. What some might interpret as arrogance, that unwavering, almost severe certainty, is in fact a necessary posture for carrying such a burden. He is not offering a hopeful possibility. He is stating a difficult, proven fact. I was broken and I was sustained. This leaves little space for the nuanced questioning or playful creativity that marks other gospel styles. His music becomes a testament of record, and he its sole, credible witness. The confidence is not his own strength, but in the undeniable reality of the strength he was given, a distinction that is personal and, to him, irrefutable. 18. Vickie Winans commands her stage with a unique and disarming weapon, laughter, her hilarious, self-deprecating banner, often poking fun at her age, her wigs, or the trials of life, creates an immediate and warm kinship with her audience. Yet, behind that accessible, grandmotherly charm operates one of the sharpest and most resilient business minds in gospel. Her longevity, spanning decades of consistent relevance, is no accident. It is a direct result of an earned, street-smart confidence in a firm, often unsentimental, control over the mechanics of her career. This duality, the warm comedian and the cool CEO, means that when she speaks her mind on matters of industry, ministry, or personal standards, she does so from an unimpeachable position of hard-won experience. That voice carries a no-nonsense finality that does not suffer fools gladly. This can translate into a public persona that is both beloved and, when necessary, formidably blunt. She has navigated the gospel industry complexities, from label politics to touring logistics, with a savvy understanding that artistry must be partnered with acumen. Her ability to control her narrative, her music, and her brand stems from a clear-eyed understanding that in a field where artists can be easily exploited, sentimentality cannot override strategy. For those accustomed to a more malleable or deferential approach, her directness and clear-sighted control can come across as stubborn or even dismissive. Her humor, in this light, becomes not just entertainment, but a strategic tool. It disarms before she ever has to draw a boundary. What might be perceived as arrogance, then, is a practical posture of a survivor. In an industry that has cycled through countless trends and stars, Vickie Winans has remained, evolving from a young bride in the Winans family to a matriarchal institution in her own right. Her confidence is not ethereal. It is granular, built on knowing what a contract should say, what a royalty statement means, and what her art is worth. She speaks her mind because she has earned the right, through years of lessons learned the hard way. 19. Hezekiah Walker operates in a realm where spiritual authority and organizational command are not just intertwined, but are necessities of the same calling. As the pastor of one of America's largest churches and the architect behind the massively influential Love Fellowship Choir, his domain is dual: a pulpit and a recording studio, a congregation and a global audience. This requires a leadership style that is inherently commanding, a personality capable of holding a sprawling vision together and steering both worshipers and musicians toward with unambiguous direction. The gentle entreaty of his signature hit, "I Need You to Survive," belies the forceful, executive energy often needed to build and maintain the very community the song describes. To manage such a vast enterprise, to corral volunteer choir voices into Grammy-winning precision, to balance the demands of a growing church with the schedule of a touring artist, requires a leader who can make decisions swiftly and enforce standards firmly. This can manifest as a pastoral forcefulness that leaves little room for committee deliberation. His direction, whether in a rehearsal or a board meeting, carries the weight of someone who believes he is executing a divine mandate, not merely expressing a preference. For those within his orbit, this can feel intensely demanding. The expectation is for alignment and excellence, a reflection of the God he serves. This approach inevitably opens him to criticism. The very traits that ensure operational excellence, decisiveness, top-down direction, and unshakable certainty in his vision, can be perceived from the outside as hierarchical arrogance or a cult of personality. When a pastor is also a celebrity hitmaker, the line between spiritual shepherding and brand management can appear blurred, and his confident leadership can be misinterpreted as a quest for dominion rather than a mechanism for discipleship. 20. T.D. Jakes operates on a scale that renders traditional labels like gospel singer or pastor insufficient. He is a sovereign of a vast multimedia empire of faith. His domain encompasses a megachurch, best-selling books, major film productions, and stadium-filling conferences, all woven into a vision of spiritual empowerment that is unabashedly corporate in its execution. This entrepreneurial magnitude requires and projects a confidence that is less about musical pitch and more about geopolitical spiritual strategy. To traditionalists, this fusion of pulpit anointing with boardroom savvy and Hollywood partnerships can feel like a fundamental overreach, a prideful conviction that he can sanctify any secular platform without being compromised by it. His demeanor is the embodiment of this command. In the pulpit, he is a force of theatrical, penetrating intelligence, dissecting human psychology and systemic brokenness with a prosecutor's precision and a prophet's fire. This oracular authority is monumental and leaves little oxygen for debate. In creative and business dealings, he is known as a formidable negotiator and a demanding visionary, expecting a level of excellence and alignment that matches his own expansive brand. The perception that follows as a man who moves with the certainty that is the summit is not mere opinion, but a form of inspired intelligence, making disagreement appear not just incorrect, but almost spiritually insubordinate. This approach inevitably draws sharp criticism, framed as the arrogance of a spiritual CEO who has commodified faith. The sheer commercial success and mainstream visibility of his operations leads some to question whether the engine is divine calling or brand management. His confidence in building bridges to secular centers of power, whether in entertainment, politics, or publishing, can be interpreted as a blurring of sacred lines, a belief that his message is uniquely equipped to thrive in any environment without losing its essence.